stories in this book that are readily shared stories of justice. And one of the main concepts here is the term of just peace reminds us that justice and peace belong together and are essentially inseparable. Peace without justice is suppression. Justice without peace is a new form of oppression. Justice and peace belong together. The term just peace has been borrowed from other thinkers. It is used to point towards a different kind of justice and peace. One where, as in Psalm 85, truth and mercy have met together. Justice and peace have kissed. And I don't think that using this just peace philosophy could be used to justify war, even if we're defending ourselves.
First of all, in relation to this book compared to others, I've got two others that several people in this class are familiar with. I didn't realize how dry these were until I picked this up. And it's interesting that the selection that an author chooses and the point that they want to get across, and when you are exposed to text like this, and then you find things like this, you start to doubt and wonder how expansive their research was in doing theirs, in doing their book. Second of all, to address both of your issues separately, first of all. What's interesting is that there is a section in this, and unfortunately, I would say the only negative of this author was that he didn't spend enough time on it, was the whole fact about war, and about how war is just so ingrained in all human beings that we're naturally, especially men, are bloodthirsty and crave war all the time. They use an example in this book about breaking a bronco called the Indian Way. And just to quote a few lines from here, when cowboys in the Old West caught a wild horse, they saw it as a creature whose spirit had to be broken before it could be useful as a cow pony. When the animal's spirit had been broken, it was ready to take its place among the other cow ponies on the ranch. Now think of this in relation globally. The Indian way of dealing with wild horses could not be in greater contrast. Native Americans saw the horse not as a wild beast to be subdued, but as a fellow creature and kindred spirit worthy of respect and consideration. There was no bucking ever. Horse and rider moved out of the corral as friends. So from the get-go, there was a base of philosophy there that you didn't have to break somebody in order to prove your point. And again, he only spends 2 sections on this philosophy that war should not be ingrained. It is not certainly something that we can just all count on each and every time to solve our problems. Interestingly enough, in the recommended reading for this class is this book here, The Human Potential for Peace, where this gentleman, Douglas Fry, argues from cover to cover about how there are communities out there, and have been out there for centuries, who don't war, who don't combat. And some of them are well known, the Norwegians, the Scandinavians. They get along fine, and his theory is that the more complex the social structure is, more internally there is strife among others, and therefore there will be strife among nations. And he puts together a very compelling point that if we go back, if we begin now and decide that we're not going to stand for war, that it is actually attainable. And in reference to Philishon's argument about turning the other cheek and being the Christian way, well, we won't have to do that then if we decide as a community, as a state, as a country, that we're not going to engage in such things. Then that's our choice, and that's exactly what Professor Fry argues in this book. A couple other areas, and I think Philishon had touched on it. There are stories in here, harrowing stories. I need to find the one. Basically, what happens is, if I can't read it for you, is that during the Second World War, there were some Jewish children being hidden in a storage unit underground. And as they're being led up the stairs one by one, there is a single gunshot heard. And all of a sudden, little boys figure out what's going on, and they start to cry. And as each one ascends the stairs, they find that a Nazi soldier is merely shooting over their head to scare them as a game. Now, that's just one example of what life was like during Nazi Germany in the rout of the Holocaust, the Warsaw Ghetto, all of the concentration camps, and yet at the same time, there were compassionate people in the world whose sole purpose of being at the time for them was to work in the resistance movement, to subdue and hide people, people who did much more extraordinary things than, say, the Otto Schindler of Schindler's List fame. That there are stories all over Europe that show that nonviolence, that resistance to causes, resistance to absolute devil incarnate could be fought by means that we're not aware of them. And the author makes it a point in several different sections throughout the book where he weaves, where there are examples of Nazi Germany where that was done. He weaves that into the famous letter, Martin Luther King Jr., letter from Birmingham jail, where it's an extraordinary piece where he basically thinks that he has people on his side who have done a public protest against what he's doing, and he basically tears them down and tells them exactly what he's doing. And to us here, in the privileged 2009 era, can look at that and say, of course you're right. It makes complete sense from beginning to end. It's a tremendous argument. That is one of the uplifting, stories besides the common stories of Cesar Chavez, Gandhi, people like that are also common in books like this. But again, this is done in a slightly different format.
I just wanted to address just a couple of things you said. You mentioned about breaking the beats, putting them in the water, and that not necessarily the Indian way, everyone. It made me think about, in all honesty, it made me think about the Willie Lynch doctrine, and pretty much the Willie Lynch doctrine. It used a similar recipe. It's called, a similar format, but it was called a recipe for creating a slave. And it also likens breaking a person down the same way that you would break down an animal or beast. Now, and I won't go into all of the graphic details, but it's an extremely gory process of really just taking a man and shredding him down to the lowest place he could possibly be, and letting that stand as an example for the rest of the men. Now, what that made me think of was, for the most part, I think, in all honesty, most people wish to live a peaceful life and are pretty much nonviolent in nature. But you have these groups, and you have this interest that's inherently evil. I mean, the thought of torturing and enslaving people, it came from somewhere. The thought of dominating and killing people and just wanting to eliminate an entire group of people, that says at least a lot. It says a lot about the propensity for violence that is within men. Now, when you're faced with that, also you mentioned people who did resistance work during the Holocaust. I had a little bit of time today, and I sat down and depressed myself the entire afternoon, really just reading up on, a variety of genocides and modern atrocities. And I found a little timeline for the Holocaust. Now, we're just looking at the first 3 years. That's it. These are just some of the things. January 30th, 1933. Adolf Hitler is appointed as Chancellor of Germany, a nation with a Jewish population of 566,000. Okay. Then you get 40,000 SA and SS men sworn in as auxiliary police. Then the Nazis burned that Reichstag building to create that chaotic atmosphere. Then we're talking about within a couple months, pretty much progresses to Hitler giving dictatorship rights to protect the people. Within this year, it ended up with, Nazis issue a decree defining a non-Aryan as anyone descending from non-Aryan, especially Jews, parents or grandparents. One parent or grandparent classifies the descendant as non-Aryan, especially if one parent or grandparent was of the Jewish faith. Then April, the Gestapo was born.